This week, I've got my friend and colleague Farzana Nasser joining us. Farzana has a really, really cool career. She has been the former global president and current board member of a group called Embolden. Some of you may know them as a group called Women in Wireless. She was the founder and CEO of Visionara. She is the founder and chief strategy officer at Gallup. She was even a brand manager at General Mills at one point. But today, she's a partner at Chameleon Collective, who specializes in doing interim VP work, both across e-commerce and also growth marketing, and frankly, her fair share of business transformation. Farzana, one of the things I really love about her is she just has this really great pulse on what's going on in the market. And as a serial entrepreneur, but also someone who's been very successful in the corporate space, I think she's got a really great mind for navigating, let's call it, challenging situations. And when you look at the world that we're living in today, I'd say we've got our fair share of challenging situations. All of us are a bit nervous about all the things that we're reading in the news when it comes to the economy and frankly, lots of different aspects of the world and the tensions we're feeling out there. And I know you're thinking about it. And certainly Farzana and I have been thinking about it. So today's episode is all about basically navigating the downturns that you might see in any kind of business environment, or to double down on our love of puns here at our ship, how to avoid a sinking ship. Now, some of you may know at OSHIP, we like to talk to different leaders and ask them about moments they've had in their careers that were particularly challenging, that maybe were not the best moments in their career, but they have frequently maybe shaped them as a leader or given them some kind of insight into being a better leader moving forward. And some of those moments were maybe not so funny at the time, but they can be kind of funny later. And we like to call those oh shit moments. But in today's episode, instead of very specifically asking Farzana about her oh shit moment, this episode almost feels like it's going to be one giant series of oh shit moments. So we're going to get into everything from discussing how the impacts or post-pandemic impacts to e-commerce, how the physical retail world is bouncing back, and how businesses are reacting to the kind of work, how people are dealing with rising advertising costs, and just frankly learning how entrepreneurs and leaders are prepping and these kind of prepping for this challenging business environment that we're going into. So with that, I welcome you to another week of Oh Ship. Farzana, welcome to Oh Ship. I'm so glad you're here.
Thanks for having me, Freddie.
Yeah, it's good. You and I get a chance to talk all the time, so I'm thankful for that. But this is the first time we've had a chance to kind of geek out with other people. So I think it's a nice mix up for you and I. I tried to do you justice with a lot of the really cool things you've been doing in your career. I like to believe a good hype man for you, but the reality is, I'll never do justice to some of the more details that are there. And I know you pretty well, but I'd love for our audience to get to know you a little bit better. So could you talk a little bit more about the kinds of businesses you've led through your career and what types of roles you've been in them?
Absolutely. Yeah, I was fortunate enough early in my career to be a brand manager on iconic household brands like Betty Crocker and Cheerios at General Mills. I'm really lucky to be part of a CPG company where marketing was general management more so than just marketing. So, I had the opportunity to manage a P&L and drive profitability and be accountable for that, not just revenue, but profitability, work on developing new products, overseeing marketing strategy and execution. So really great kind of foundational stepping stone to everything that I've done thereafter. And another opportunity that has been incredibly meaningful in my career was founding a venture-backed marketing technology company and going through that whole process of, building something from nothing. We essentially used behavioral data to develop predictive audience recommendations. We were a
Very
Facebook
cool.
marketing partner. We won the Facebook Innovation Award. I've gone through the fundraising process, built teams. Really great experience overall there. Had fantastic clients like the New York Times and AccuWeather. And then, in addition to that, as you mentioned, I led a global nonprofit organization. Supporting women is a huge passion point for me, especially in the workforce. And leading a nonprofit organization for women in digital was an incredible experience. It was a global organization. We had over 200 volunteers that we
Wow.
oversaw and over 10,000 members. And so
Wow.
that was a really great experience as well. And now I'm leading growth marketing for e-commerce businesses. So it's kind of like a nice sort of trajectory from everything I've done and bits and pieces of that into what I'm doing now, which I love. So
I don't want to, kind of date or age either of us, but we've been doing this for a while. How many major kind of downturns, I think, at a macro level, have you navigated? I assume you went through the 2008, 2009 stuff.
yes.
What other kind of big, crazy ones have you had to deal with? Obviously, pandemic. I guess, any other? Were you running a businesses in the 2000s, or did you manage to avoid the fun of that one?
I managed to just avoid the fun of that one when the dot-com bubble burst.
Yeah.
I was still in school at the
Yeah.
time. So just missed that one by like a couple
But
years.
you've been through two doozies though.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly, exactly. And I can't believe that, like when we talk about the 2007, 2008, the Great Recession that people refer to, that was 14 years ago. Like as I was thinking
crazy.
about what we were going to talk about today, I couldn't believe that like
Yeah.
it's been that long, but it feels like yesterday because I remember it really well.
Were you running one of your own businesses during that one, or were you inside another company?
So I was at General Mills during
Yeah,
that time.
yeah,
And, fortunately there, that's a food is a consumer staple. So
yeah,
a little bit more recession proof than most brands. But, we were getting hit really hard by private label. And so
yeah,
that was really the threat. At the time, like normally during a recession, people cook more at home, they go out a little bit less. So that's really favorable. We did see that where people shop
mm,
changed pretty dramatically. So
mm,
discount stores like Walmart and Costco
mm,
seemed to be much more prominent during that time. And so thinking about how we position our brands and how we position ourselves to set us up to provide value to consumers during that time was really kind of a core part of what we were thinking about overall, and thinking about our product mix and how we offer, special products to certain retailers depending on their offerings. And so, that was a really interesting time for me, and quite memorable as we think through how to appeal to consumer sentiment during that
mhm.
time, and how to still remain relevant. And then on a personal note, close to the end of that recession, I actually did a pretty gutsy thing and quit my job. So,
Nice. I'm
I think.
interested. Is that when you started was that you started, you quit it and then started a business?
Well, when I quit, so a lot of the sentiment around recessions is like hunker down, hold on tight, don't leave. People tend to be more risk averse during
Yeah,
recessions, and I feel like my personality is to take more risks because I think that there's just so much opportunity to be had during times like that. Like it's the right time to like. I'm not a financial advisor by any means, but a lot of people think it's the right time to invest in the stock market during a
mm,
downturn, right? Like there's value there. I quit my job, which was very stable. I'd been promoted, had a wonderful job at the time, and compensation was great, and I could have stayed, but I quit my job. I moved to New York City without a job during a really scary time. We lived in the East Village. I remember still like all of the stores being boarded up. Like
yeah,
retail was desecrated at that time. And I remember Circuit City near Union Square closing down, and the boards around that entire store, like a massive piece of real estate
crazy.
at that time. But I saw an opportunity. The world was changing so much at that
Mm,
time, and so when you think about the Great Recession, like what was happening then, Facebook was becoming mainstream. Everybody was on it at that point.
mm.
The App Store launched during that time, and then like all of these great companies came out of that. And so I
Great disruption. They say opportunity and chaos, I think is the classic saying.
completely. And, I decided actually to go back to school during that time and get my master's degree at NYU in digital marketing. because I felt like the world was changing and I was already feeling like we were behind. We were so reliant on agencies to
Mm.
understand what was happening. And I wanted to be at the forefront of that change. And that was really my segue into performance marketing and direct response and really being on top of technology and understanding what was happening. I wanted to be at the forefront of that. And like that really started my trajectory as my career as a performance marketer. And that's why I love to talk about the dichotomy between brand and performance marketing, because I spent half my career on both sides of it, and I'm really interested in kind of that this segmentation between those two, and that overlap is quite interesting to me. And as we talked about, recessions are an incredible time to upskill and to learn and to embrace new things. And my master's degree thesis, actually, during my digital marketing program, ended up being the business plan for the startup that I eventually ended up
It's
founding
awesome.
after school. So,
A lot of people don't have the courage to take the theory and put it into practice. So hats off to you. Everyone knows who watches our ship. I'm extremely passionate about entrepreneurs. I think it's a very close knit community of crazy people willing to throw themselves in the fire for something they're passionate about. So
absolutely.
I could really appreciate that.
Where were
You know,
you, Freddie, during the Great Recession? I know everybody has a
I was very
story.
lucky. I had been, I'm a diehard, digital guy for most of my career, and I feel like when the ship hit the fan, so to speak, and people were pulling all their money into back into their kind of safe space, but they were still kept pumping money into digital, and so I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. In fact, people doubled down on it, so and I was again extremely fortunate when I feel like a lot of people were really hurting. I was still experiencing a growth phase, and I've been able to um, ride that growth phase for most of my career because I think people continually invested in digital because that's only been an uptick to the right for a long time until really recently, which is something that I think we're definitely going to address today. Um, so I'd love to start at the high level before really diving in deep into an area of passion that you and I are both really passionate about. Just at a high level, what are some of the big things, the big lessons you've learned both now as an executive in a major company and as a founder, if you were to tell people how do you prep for navigating a downturn in the market?
Yeah, I think the key thing is to be informed. And
Mm,
luckily, I feel like this current climate is probably the most anticipated recession in history. And so everyone seems to be looking at the key indicators and being more informed on what's happening. And I think that's important because if you know what the situation is, you're able to navigate it much more clearly. And so, we're seeing interesting, tickers like consumer sentiment at an all-time low, decade low. We're also seeing that there's been 2 quarters of GDP declines, which is generally an indication of a recession. But nobody has declared it that way as yet. There's kind of differing sentiment. Are we in a recession right now? Are we moving into a recession? There's a lot of debate around that currently. Inflation's at an all-time high, 40-year high. We have 9% inflation. It's unbelievable. The stock market has been all over the place. So
mm,
generally inflation hits, lower mid-income much more hard than like higher income. But we're seeing that even people in the top 1% are getting impacted because the stock market is all over the place. And between you and I haven't looked at my cryptocurrency portfolio in 6 months because I just don't want to
I
know.
stopped everything and it was too upsetting.
Yeah.
Just gave
Yeah.
up.
But then there's positives as well, like unemployment is really low, and so currently, like the labor market is still tight, compensation is still going up, and that shows kind of positive signs that we might avoid a very deep or prolonged recession, like the Great Recession that we saw nearly 14 years ago.
Um, so I know we pulled up a couple bits of data. Let's flip to the next one, please. I thought this was really interesting. Was the split across Americans you kind of sent over? Do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I think this is interesting. Like, like we talked about, Freddie, like you and I have seen a couple recessions now, and older
Mm,
Americans, no surprise, are more pessimistic because they've seen this rodeo before, right? We've
mm,
gone through it. We know what happens. And so there is pessimism there. To me, this is even a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, because consumer sentiment is low and because there is pessimism, is that going to create more of a recession than if people were a little bit more optimistic overall? But it's definitely impacting older Americans, which is also interesting because that's where the higher income Americans generally are as well. They tend to skew older.
One of the things I think is really challenging about where we're at right now, I'm a diehard news consumer, and I think so. I couldn't agree with you more on being informed. It's my guilty pleasure slash addiction. I read an insane amount of news, and I read across the whole kind of spectrum of news sites because I find that the only way to kind of get to some form of reality is to kind of consume lots of data from lots of different pieces and then make your own decisions about what you pull together. And one of the things I think is really fascinating about America today in particular, and I don't want to make this any form of a political conversation, but I feel like the content that you see on television news, which I think it might be more around what older Americans are consuming versus, let's say, online news, I think is slanted a certain way, and you can't help but wonder how much of that is impacting consumer sentiment today.
Mhm.
Is it being driven by just the media consumptions of people? And I think it's like what do they say when you're trying to be like positive, like, hey, think positive and it will happen. But I think when we all collectively as a society start to think negatively, it's manifestation basically.
Completely.
And so I think the we got to watch it because it happens. You think it and it happens. People, that sheer paranoia of going, I think it's going to go wrong. I'm going to protect myself. So you
Mhm.
start going to turtle mode and stop spending. And when people stop spending, the whole business starts to go wrong.
Absolutely.
Um,
And some
to,
shocking things have happened that have made people be afraid, I think. Like e-commerce declined for the first time in a very long time in April. So that was scary, I think, for people. And then I
Yeah,
don't
and
know if you saw there's been
yeah,
layoffs
this is
as well.
kind of what
So
I alluded to earlier. It's like you feel like you've been on with for me. I was thinking about I started doing internet marketing in 1996, and it's like I had been on a 20-plus-year run, and you're like you just assume that it only goes one direction, and I think that was kind of shocking to shocking a lot of people, especially in the industry. Now you can't help but wonder if you look at this chart though, where there's that course correction there, but it's only after this like totally insane uptick that goes damn near vertical, at one point there. Um,
exactly. Yeah, this is actually a chart that the CEO of Shopify put in his layoff memo to his employees. They laid off 10% of their workforce over the last couple weeks. And a lot of companies, especially in e-commerce, bet big on the pandemic accelerating e-commerce growth and accelerating it to the point of where it would be in like 5 or 10 years
mhm.
over just the next like over a couple years over the pandemic. And so e-commerce is still growing though, so I don't think it's everyone kind of run for the hills, it's over, we're done for.
Well,
It's
no,
just course
it
correcting.
went up God knows how many percent in a span of 6 months. So a small reduction there. I don't think it's the end of the world. But can you talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing there? So obviously we're both in the field. People are course correcting. So what are people doing, and what should they be doing if they're anywhere in some kind of e-commerce business right now?
Yeah, I'm seeing layoffs. So people are course correcting and trying to reduce their fixed costs. I'm also seeing, companies thinking about reforecasting their expectations for the year as well. Chain challenges seem to be improving, so I think that's definitely positive. It's been a pretty rough couple years for e-commerce marketers. Like we had with the pandemic, everybody was like trying to figure out what was going on, and now we know like consumers actually do like to shop in stores. So, we've seen an uptick in physical retail. And then, the last year has been about comping to the pandemic and how to comp to that. So yeah, I can see the return of physical retail, and then comping to the pandemic has been challenging. And now looking at a recession, so another interesting challenge. And as you think about all of this change, it's probably more change in the last 3 years than we've seen in the last 10 before that. So being able to navigate that change and being adaptable and flexible to that, I think is really critical especially like given all of the change that we've seen overall. Even Amazon is reporting e-commerce decline. So, we've definitely seen an impact, and a course correction that's happening. And now we need to start looking at how we can best serve the customer and where the opportunities are to optimize beyond that. Some of the things that I think that e-commerce teams are looking at and can start to look at if they haven't already is how to think through, really kind of laser in and focus on where they can optimize. And so in a challenging situation, or in a time when you have to really think about profitability as well as revenue, how do you mitigate the impact to revenue? There's a lot of ways to do that. And one of them is thinking about the purchase journey and really laser focusing and being thoughtful on every step of that journey and how to fine tune and optimize that. So a lot of it is, just going back to basics. How do you reduce your reliance on ad spend? We have a chart in there on how rapidly advertising spend has gone up and how expensive it's gotten. So how do you reduce your reliance on that? Like thinking about things like SEO, looking at content, looking at, what you're doing from an owned perspective, thinking through, how you think about your brand and your positioning overall, looking at your landing pages. It's truly back to basics. We're talking about, with the brands that I work on, like our product mix. What's a good entry level product for a new customer in a recession? How do you speak to consumers in a way that recognizes the current state of the economy and the current situation? What type of messaging would resonate with them during a time like this?
It's real quick. What do you think is driving the advertising costs up so high?
It's really supply and demand. I think that during the pandemic, people pulled back substantially on their advertising spend, especially like bigger categories like entertainment and travel. And that pullback helped alleviate some of the pressure that marketers generally feel on advertising costs. They're always going to go up. But the pandemic, I think, deflated them more than we would have typically have seen in a normal year. And they're continuing to go up because money is continuing to be invested into these platforms. And so, a big piece of this is what's going to happen over the next 6 months. A silver lining could be that, as companies pull back, they reforecast and they think about what their expectations are for the year, they might start pulling back on media spend. And that could actually help with this insane trajectory of like double digit rise in CPCs and CPMs across platforms. I actually am fortunate enough to be an analyst on a Commerce Next benchmarking study that we recently did earlier this year. And the two things that came up with that study, as far as challenges that e-commerce marketers are facing, and the study was done earlier this year, but the two things that came up were rising advertising costs. People are the most concerned about that. And then talent and a shortage of talent.
Which
And
also has incredible rising costs, worth noting.
exactly. But the silver lining could be there could be a pullback on ad spend, which could lower costs. And going into recessionary times, that might actually create less of an impact on the labor market. There might be more talent available during a time like that. So there's opportunities there, I think, for companies to potentially
Yeah.
capitalize on.
So one of the things we I think we're addressing and being open about is there is because of so many changes in consumer behavior, variables that are out in the market that are impacting decision making, a lot of that being cost driven, just availability of talent and resources, and just all these driving factors that basically shape the business. And I think we're both acknowledging that it's hard to plan right now, but people are still having to make decisions. So you can't go into analysis paralysis either,
Yeah.
right? So, what kind of recommendations, at least at a broad level, would you kind of try and make for people in preparation for, a potential downturn in the market? Obviously, it can't be specific to any business because we're not talking to a client, but is there any kind of broad generalizations that you'd recommend for folks right now?
Yeah, what we know about recessions is that consumers tend to spend on brands that they know and trust. So there's a huge opportunity there, I think, from a retention perspective and getting consumers to continue to be engaged with your brand. We also know that during recessionary times that people are much more hesitant to switch. And so that loyalty piece is really critical.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, like
Do you
brands,
see that as an opportunity out of interest, or more like a defensive position?
I think it's an opportunity. If people are less willing to shop around competitively because
Hmm.
and bet on something that they don't know, then I
Hmm.
think there's a huge opportunity when you think about like customer lifetime value and
Hmm.
really growing that overall. And that if you can raise customer lifetime value and if you can get customers to come back and be loyal, then
Hmm.
you can mitigate the rising CAC. So as advertising costs go up, if you're raising your
Hmm.
LTV, you're still in a profitable situation.
Hmm.
And so I think there's lots of opportunity there.
Hmm.
And then, when you look at conversion rates, like if you have a 5% conversion rate, there's 95% of opportunity there for you to fine tune the purchase
Hmm.
journey. So I think that's also another really great opportunity. I think times like this are good times to get back to basics and really get back to the fundamentals of the business to drive profitability overall and mitigate any impact to revenue.
I think that's really great advice. One of the things that if you're going to talk to clients about or businesses I'm helping to manage is I'm talking about this concept of nail the basics, and I think in times and periods of great growth when there's excess budgets and things that people are just trying to grab as much market share as you can, people start exploring new channels. They don't optimize the existing channels that they have for acquiring customers because they're like, grow, grow, grow. We're making tons of money, loads of profits coming in, and they're just trying to do this. But the
Mhm.
reality is, after periods of that, which we just went through, all those little fingers, those channels that they had going up, a lot of times they weren't executed very well. They sacrificed quality and competence for speed, and now it's like going back and really executing those in a flawless way is important. One of the biggest things we're seeing, in many of the conversations I have with investors and the investor community that I tend to engage with, is really nailing customer relationship management. And it's like, it's expensive to acquire. It's also very expensive to lose customers. And so, when people are really optimizing that retention, that loyalty, or even more so than that, so I'm seeing is a lot of like re-engagement. Like, there's
Mhm.
people that loved you once. It's not from 5 years ago, but maybe 6 months ago or a year ago. And how do you get them back in love with
Yeah,
your brand, your products, or your services? I think could actually be a lot less expensive than trying to introduce yourself to someone new and make them fall in love.
absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And I
um,
think a big mistake that sometimes companies make during times like this is they pull back on brand spend and they only spend at the bottom of the funnel. And then you're hitting the same people over and over again. But I think that the brand equity becomes really important at a time like this because people need to be able to trust.
big time. What I went before I went another territory that I want to move into in a minute. But before we do that, is there any other big areas that you feel that I didn't address? Kind of thinking about this kind of general subject that you'd like to touch on, or if anyone in the audience has a question that's related to this kind of general territory, if you feel free to chime in and I can address it. I know there's a lot to unpack here, and I know you had a lot of opinions. I want to make sure I didn't miss anything.
Yeah, I think we covered it on my end. I think
Yeah.
the key takeaway on this is like never let a good crisis go to waste. Like it's really an opportunity to laser focus on the key things that are important to your business. And then, we think about like as we were talking about the Great Recession years ago, like all of the companies that came out of that recession, like Airbnb was founded, Uber, Square,
Mm,
Venmo, like there was so much innovation that happened during that time. And, we're at another kind of tipping point as far as when we think about the environment that we're in, Web3 and the metaverse and everything that comes along with that, NFTs. I think there's another really interesting sort of catalyst during this time, similar to the recession 14 years ago when the App Store launched, that are really interesting opportunities for companies to start thinking about to stay relevant.
yeah, I think, a positive spin. If you are someone that has been negatively impacted by uh, where we're at right now, and you somehow find yourself on the other end of a layoff, and you're out there hunting for a new job, take that time around that job hunting to potentially also explore changes in careers, education, double down on some of the new disruptive technologies out there, because you may be able to play that to your advantage. So, take advantage of these down moments. I think that's great. So I want to talk a little bit about, I guess, how to address challenges, whether you're, kind of dividing into two swim lanes, right? So what I think is so interesting about your career, you've been a founder, you've been an entrepreneur, you've also been an employee within other organizations. So I feel like we've got two different potential audiences of people that are listening to OSHIP today. You've got these kind of entrepreneurs and executives who are leaders, who may be kind of running a business on some level, whether they're founder or within a corporate environment, and they're thinking about certain things when they're trying to navigate a downturn. And then you've got another set of people that, or maybe the employees, maybe they're kind of a subject matter expert and a contributor to some business. They could potentially be a freelancer, an independent consultant, something like that. What's the difference between, kind of at a high level, navigating a downturn when you're with that group versus the other group in your personal experiences?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. And Freddie, you know this, having gone through this so many times, but as a founder, the amount of pressure that you have is like different than ever being an employee or part of a team. And so you're definitely under a lot more pressure, and you have a lot more accountability. And I think that as a leader, the the main kind of importance when you think about like being a founder in a downturn, the most important element is communication. Because of that
Mm,
accountability, you need your team to be on the same boat with you.
mm,
And you need to be kind of setting the course and navigating those waters and having everyone come along. And so
mm,
communicating during those times and really focusing the team is so important. As an employee, it's really about finding the places to chip in. Like, if
mm,
everyone's at war, it's like, how can I help? How, like,
mm,
if we have clear direction, we know the course that we need to take. What can I do as an employee to help accelerate that? So, finding opportunities to kind of take up that and really jump in and be part of the team is really, really critical. So it's a very different perspective. I think also as an employee, there needs to be a little bit of faith as well. So you have to have trust in your leadership. And if they're
mm,
communicating, then you don't want to be the one who's like paralyzed in fear. Like
mhm,
I think the most important thing during challenging times is to keep moving. You know, there's a
mm,
there's a really famous quote. I think it was Albert Einstein that said something like, "The most important thing, like, is to keep moving forward." Like, if you don't keep moving forward, you're going to fall off your bike. And so I tell
mhm.
my 6-year-old daughter that all the time now. I'm like, just keep pedaling, just
You
keep
keep
going.
pedaling. Sound advice. Nail the basics and keep pedaling. I love that. I want to lean in on this divide what you just said into kind of two conversations. So first off, I think the advice on communication is really key. It's people fail to acknowledge sometimes when they start getting in a very challenging business situation. It's easy to get focused on the numbers. It's easy to, you're looking at spreadsheets. You're getting pressure from your boss, or just feeling it from the general business. If you're an entrepreneur, you get very worried about the money, and there's a part of that that can be very robotic. Um, and you need to remind yourself that you've got this whole team of people that, whether even if you're not their direct boss, might look at you as a leader, and they look at you as a point of stability. And there's no other way to say it. People get scared. They're consuming this media. We talked about this consumer sentiment earlier, and people feeling pessimistic. That's not just feeling pessimistic about do you want to have enough money to buy a big screen TV at Christmas this year? It's like, or so, something that's more frivolous like that. They're going, am I going to have a job? Am I going to be part of these layoffs? I keep reading about this kind of stuff. What's going to happen? What happens if that happens? That people can really spin out. And I think I love this concept. I talk about it quite a lot, about like over communicating, and I think there is an appropriate time to over communicate. And what does it mean by over communicating? I don't mean incessantly rambling, and I don't mean holding 50,000 meetings a day, but just being really clear and concise about updating people with um, positive information that is reaffirming, but also acknowledging negative information with a solution, or at a minimum acknowledging it and saying we're working on it. People want to know that you're not ignoring it, because then they go, you have this moment where you're like, is anyone even driving this bus? That's when people freak out.
Yeah.
They freak out when that happens.
Yeah. I
And
think
then on
people
the
wanna
second
know that
side,
someone
I'm
else
sorry.
is worrying about it. If someone else is worrying about it, I think that takes pressure off.
Big time, big time. And so I think people need to feel that. And you got to remember that, sometimes people that have been worked through their careers to become leaders in whatever capacity, like, they're battle hardened. They were selected as leaders for a reason. A lot of that thing with leaders is they can take on some additional stress, that and not panic under pressure. And other people need to be able to tap into you as a energy source to kind of help them navigate this. And at the same time, the thing you mentioned, I think on the employee side, or the individual contributor side, I thought was really cool. It's not where my brain would have instantly gone. Is around pausing and going, I can help. You know what? You don't have to be the SVP of this or the VP of that or the founder or the CEO to know that every single person within the organization can help in some level. So if you're feeling stressed and you've got this anxiety that is weighing you down, and you're worried about it, well, just know that if you and everyone else you're working with just did a little bit each, it does
Mhm.
make a difference.
Yes.
They talk about job security is like being like, be valuable, provide value to the company. And that feels very clinical and very um, robotic to me. And it sounds very much like, I don't know. It doesn't necessarily make you, it's not inspiring to say, make sure you provide value, right?
Yeah.
But if you really care about your job and you actually want to stay there, just
Mhm.
think about it as like you're all helping to make sure this thing you actually enjoy works and succeeds. It's not on just the burden of the upper management to make sure that works. Everyone's got to do their part.
Absolutely, and the company's success is your success, so,
Yeah,
everyone shares in that.
yeah, I love that. I think that's it's really a great advice. Um,
Something
and
I've
then
been
look, if
seeing
you're
a
out,
lot lately is, especially, during times of uncertainty, something I've been saying a lot lately is focus on the stuff you can control, because, 60% of what's going on you can't control, but if you're focused on what you can do about that 30 or 40% that you do have control over, that I think gives people a little bit more momentum to actually be able to do something.
what about the independent freelancers out there? Obviously, a subject you and I are really passionate about. So, whether if you're truly out there, you're a true independent consultant. Like, what do you think is going to happen to people in that line of work in a downturn?
I think really similar to employees, it's like think about where you can contribute, right?
Hmm.
Like we know what the situation is. What can you do to help? Like that 30% that is still in our control, how can you help in that way? What can
Hmm.
you do to improve the situation, help mitigate issues and challenges? I think that's going to be really important to just create value in a time like this. And then from an independent consultant perspective, diversifying your own portfolio is really key, right? Like when you
Mm.
think about the industries and the verticals you work with and the type of work you do and the number of clients you have, like being able to diversify that so that you're protecting yourself, I think is really important.
Say the bit of advice I would give for anyone watching this is or listening to this is fine tune basically your value proposition personally. I think sometimes when people get maybe they especially if they're an independent consultant, maybe they lose a client, they've got some extra capacity, and I want you to follow Farzana's advice. Keep pedaling, and I think instead of kind of taking in that moment and going, oh, I'm open and watching Netflix and stewing and freaking out, take that downtime and reinvest in yourself. Earlier we said, hey, use that to find new disruptive technologies or opportunities or career exploration, or reinvest it in making sure that people really understand what you do. And have you got case studies of your work? If you haven't done that, you've got some extra time, do that. think about, reinvest in the things that are going to help you kind of sell yourself better, because there may be slightly less work out there, but there'll be the same number of people trying to basically win that work. So you almost have to prepare for a little bit of war. And I think this kind of concept of prepping for war is maybe another theme that people need to come out of this with, is that you don't stand still, you don't panic, you don't especially if you're a leader, you prep to make sure that you can win in a competitive environment. You've got the resources. If you're a leader in a corporate environment and you've got talent on hand, and for some reason maybe they're feeling less productive because of some kind of lack of utilization for whatever reason, turn that energy inwards, make it productive, and prepare for war. um,
Absolutely. Yeah. And the two things that I would add to that are, one, like be a lifelong student, like be curious,
yeah.
keep learning. This is a
Mm,
good opportunity to upskill, learn new things, ask a lot of questions. Education is not just formal, it can be informal.
yeah.
I think also community is so important at times like
Mm,
this. So, speaking to peers in your industry, really critical, finding different support systems through this process. I'm part of an executive women's network called Chief, and that has
yeah.
been so valuable for me through the pandemic. There's also, e-commerce communities that you can be part of. I even started a mom boss Slack chat in our Chameleon Collective chat
Awesome.
where all the moms kind of commiserate during the pandemic on what we were going to do with our kids. So there's community, I think, are the types of things that get you through it, and then lastly, like tenacity, like it's not going to be easy. Like change is a part of life, but sticking with it, pushing through, from a marketer's perspective, we're always testing. A marketer's work is never done. I think that goes for anything. Like if you're a consultant or whatever line of work that you're doing, there's always opportunities to evolve, to grow, to keep trying new things, and to keep pushing forward. Like just stick with it and have that hustle. We talk a lot about being an entrepreneur and what that's like. And I think that the hustle around that and getting scrappy and thinking outside of the box are key skills, especially during challenging times, that you need to sort of flex that muscle. Like, don't get complacent, stay relevant.
You said a moment ago, you touched on the community, and frankly, a lot of it sounds like mental health. I think is really important. Okay, and we've certainly seen some very sad stories over the last couple of years of how people have been dealing with the downturn we've been experiencing already, even if the economy has been strong in many regards. Um, how do you deal with stress, out of interest, just personally, if you don't mind me getting real, on a personal level, but just taking all the macro stuff out of it, just, for Donna, how do you deal with stress? What's your
Sure.
process?
Yeah, definitely. I think that when we talk about dealing with stress, we just went through a global pandemic. I think everyone has their story on what their experience was during that, and it wasn't easy for anyone. What I try to do, like in general, is I think during times that are stressful situations, you need to get creative, and the only way to get creative is to pull yourself out of the situation. Like find a
Mhm,
way mentally to step out of the problem so you're looking at it from the outside in, so that you can
mhm,
really get into defining what is the problem and how can I solve it. I get some of my best ideas in the shower or when I wake up in the morning, like I'm dreaming about it overnight.
mhm,
And so finding those kind of outlets for like taking care of yourself and stepping out of the situation, like a lot of people think that if there's a problem, you need to focus on it and just look at it all day, every day. And if you don't step away from it, it's really hard to get that perspective. And so I feel like, doing the opposite, like stepping out of the situation, helps me to look into it in a more objective way overall. And then, as I mentioned, community is huge for that as well. I think that nobody wants to feel like they're in a situation alone, and being able to speak with others and getting ideas from other people and being able to have kind of a think tank is such a nice way to build
mhm,
community and also bounce ideas off people. And so finding that, people talk about your board of directors or your mentor, but it can even just be your peers. It doesn't have to be people who have more experience than you. It's really just about having an outlet to talk about things, and
mhm.
finding the right groups and opportunities and environments to do that, I think is so important.
Yeah, I really want to lean in on this as a kind of a final thought for today's episode, and that is, for people out there, Farzana and I happen to be, partners in a group called Chameleon Collective, and we have a peer group, and that helps us when things get stressful. Well, I know there's a lot of people out there who sometimes are founders or CEOs of organizations that they're got you know, X number of people working for them, and they don't necessarily, maybe even people like that may feel like they're alone, as odd as that may be. And I know there's people out there who are independent consultants who may feel alone. And I know that stress can be really overwhelming, and this can feel really daunting, and that can be as far extreme as people who are so stressed out they're considering things like taking their own life, to people who just don't know what to do next for their business. They're panicking. And so, I really want to stress that there are a lot of groups out there that, it doesn't, if you feel uncomfortable talking even to your friends about some of the stress and feelings that you're having, there are a lot of web-based groups that you can just go join. And, it doesn't have to be some people that you've built, a years long bond with. Just going and talking in some of these open forums and open groups can be enough. And honestly, sometimes talking to people that aren't as close to you can be great, because maybe you can feel a little bit more open. I think when people have a business or a career, something that feels like it's struggling or really going through its own shit moment, people, especially in the entrepreneur game where everyone has to say how they're quote unquote crushing it all the time,
Fake it till you make it.
they can feel this sense of shame that they don't want to talk about it, or they're worried about the business not making it, or they're worried if they talk about it, their investors are going to hear about it, and somehow that may prevent them from raising money, and all these crazy things that happen to you, at least you speaking through an entrepreneur's lens. And there are safe places where you can have chats like that, and do it even anonymously if it helps you to learn or blow off some of that tension. So go do it if you get the opportunity. Um, so, I really think this could be a good jumping off point for the day. Farzana, thank you so much for joining us. I always love chatting with you. Like I said, we could have chatted for hours more. I appreciate you putting together some data that was good to share for our audience today. What's the best way for people to follow you if they want to engage with you more or learn more about you?
Sure. Yeah, you can follow me on LinkedIn or on Twitter at Farzana Nasser.
Okay, what's better, for Twitter or LinkedIn these days?
Either. Either
Uh,
works.
no, I mean, what's your favorite?
Oh, what's my favorite? I'm on LinkedIn a lot more these
Yeah,
days.
I'm going
Yeah.
on LinkedIn these days. I'm seeing that trend. Well, thank you again for everyone who's watching our ship, whether you're watching us live or you're tuning in on via our podcast or any one of our broadcasts across YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Periscope. I think we're on Instagram these days. Any place you're watching our stream, really appreciate you tuning in. If you're listening, great. We're thrilled you're consuming the ship show, the audio podcast, but check out the web show if you've never done it before. Thank you very much for supporting us. And the best thing you can do to continue to support our ship is subscribe, like, or tell your friends. And we'll see you next week on O Ship. Bye, Farzana. Thanks again.
Thanks, Freddie.